The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus showed himself again to the disciples. It was by the Sea of Tiberias, and it happened like this. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two more of the disciples were together. Simon Peter said, "I am going fishing." And they replied, "We'll come with you." And they went out and got into the boat, but they caught nothing that night. It was light by now, and there stood Jesus on the shore, though the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. Jesus called out, "Have you caught anything, friends?" When they answered, "No," he said, "Throw the net out to starboard, and you will find something." So they dropped the nets, and there were so many fish that they could not haul it in. The disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And these words, "It is the Lord," Simon Peter, who had practically nothing on, wrapped his cloak around him, jumped into the water. The other disciples came on in the boat, towing the net and the fish, and they were only about 100 yards from the land. As soon as they came ashore, they saw that there was some bread there and a charcoal fire with fish cooking on it. And Jesus said, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." And Simon Peter went aboard and dragged the net to the shore, full of big fish, 153 of them. And in spite of there being so many, the net was not broken. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples was bold enough to ask, "Who are you?" They knew quite well it was the Lord. And Jesus then stepped forward, took the bread, and gave it to them, and the same with the fish. And this was the third time that Jesus showed himself to the disciples after rising from the dead. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
You know, each resurrection story has its own incredible drama and dynamic. Each one. You see this one? This one is special. Emmaus and this are really kind of very special moments. Because here, the text, and I want to unfold it for you. Remember, at the very beginning of John's Gospel, Jesus met Peter. Where did he meet him? He met him on his boat tending his net and said to him, "Go and pay out again for your net." And he said, "Master, we worked hard all night, we caught nothing." But he trusted Jesus, he went, he did it. Here at the end of the story now, Jesus finds them in the same position and tells them the same thing. But here's the difference. In the beginning, at that first time when he met Peter, he said, "I call you now not to be fishers, but to become fishers of men." He called them away from fishing to do another vocation. Peter has gone back to his first livelihood and left his vocation. He's left the calling that Jesus gave to him. And the disciples here in total, utter confusion. I suppose like some people in COVID-19 who just don't know what to do, don't know how to work, don't know what they're supposed to be doing, not sure where up is up and down is down, and confused like anything. So they're in this state of confusion, not sure what to do. So Peter has this bright idea, "Come, I go in fishing," and being the leader, guess what? Everybody follow him. So he's gone back to what he was doing before. And what happens? Jesus meets him right there and says to them, "Have you caught anything? Put your net out again now." Now, the scripture says they were only 100 yards out from the shore. And yet their net caught 153 large fish. Now, that is highly improbable, because 100 yards from shore, if you get some little wabin, you're good. So far less to get 153 great fish, except that you know that this is a miracle that the Lord is doing as a risen Lord for these disciples. As soon as they catch the fish, John, who's one of the sons of Zebedee, who was there in the original scene when they were fishing, who was also called and left his father's net and boat and went to follow Jesus. It is John, the beloved disciple, who knows Jesus and who has a special relationship with him, who says to Peter, "It is the Lord." Remember I told you this, the pattern, huh? That Jesus will appear, he will be unrecognizable to everyone, something will happen, and that something will allow them to recognize that it is the risen Christ with them. And that these patterns aren't only for the early church, these patterns are for us in our time to recognize the risen Christ. The breaking of the bread, the calling by name, each one touching the wounded Christ. Each one of these patterns is important for us as church. So in this pattern, what we have fished all night, we have caught nothing. Doesn't that sound like the church in the last 50 years? We've been fishing all night, and we've been catching nothing. We've been having more people leaving the net than coming into the net. And we've been in an unfruitful situation in terms of the vocation that God has given to the church to be fishers of men and to cast the net wide and broad to bring people back to him. We've fished all night and we've caught nothing. And what Jesus is saying to us today in this post-COVID world is lower your net one more time. That's what he's saying. Put out your net one more time. Don't worry about the experience of yesterday. Don't worry about the experience of the last 10 or 20 years. Don't worry about what you have learned or didn't learn before. Just be obedient. Put your net out one more time. And here, as soon as they put the net out one more time, the miracle of the fish happens, the fruitfulness of the church takes place, and in the fruitfulness of the church, the beloved says to Peter, "It is the Lord." It isn't Peter who recognizes him, it's the beloved. But it is Peter who acts. As soon as Peter hears it is the Lord, he has very little on, he grabs something, throw it around him, jump in the water, and start making for the shore. It is the Lord is all Peter needed to hear to send Peter into action, into motion, into a movement towards Christ. As soon as you recognize it is the Lord, wherever that is in your life, then we have to, like Peter, make a movement, an action, something towards Christ. Don't wait. Don't dilly-dally. Don't hold back. Don't do anything. Don't even think. Just move towards Christ, because as you start moving towards Christ, Christ is already there preparing for you. So Peter comes ashore, meets the Lord, and he sees a charcoal fire and he sees some bread. And this is so beautiful. Jesus has provided the fish, but he says to them, "Go and bring some of the fish you caught." They catch anything at all? Is Jesus put the fish in the net? Go and bring some of the fish you caught, because Jesus wants us to participate with him in this meal. So the disciples and Jesus are participating in this feeding exercise. But what he's doing here first is he's feeding his church. He's feeding his disciples. He's feeding the apostles that he had ordained and who he had called to go to the whole world to proclaim the good news. He's feeding them first. And in feeding them, he's doing something inside of them to awaken inside of them a hunger, a thirst, a desire for him. Now, Jesus has been feeding us rich food, rich food. And in his feeding of us, he's doing it because he's preparing us for a going out. He's preparing us for a new dispensation. He's preparing us for a new time. He's preparing us for a new epoch of church. He's feeding us richly because he wants us well nourished in our faith to be ready for the thing that he will call us to. Peter and the disciples are there, and they say there are 153 fish, and that little note is an interesting note. There were 153 peoples in the known world at that time, when you took ethnicity or nations. And it symbolized all the different peoples, the whole of the human race that will be called to the net, which is Christ, and will be called to the fold of Christ as the apostles will do their ministry to proclaim the gospel message. And you will see in Acts of the Apostles, which we'll be reading continuously until Pentecost, that the word goes from Jerusalem out to the whole known world, to the ends of the earth. That's the fruitfulness of the church. I want you to pause this morning now, to think of your relationship with Christ, or your ministry that you might have been in, and think of the ways that it has not been fruitful. Think of the ways that you can identify with the apostles. We have fished all night and we have caught nothing. I want you to reflect on that for a moment. And I want you to hear, in that aspect of your life, in that relationship with Christ, in that ministry that you might be in, I want you to hear the message of Jesus. Pay out your nets one more time. This is a new dispensation. This is a new springtime. This is what Pope John Paul spoke about back in the last century, back in 1979 and 1980, when he said, there will be a new springtime of the church in the new century. And he prepared for it. As we came up to the year 2000, he prepared the whole church for a new springtime. This is the new springtime. This is the new moment when he's saying to us, pay out your nets one more time.